Okay, good morning, everyone. I'm going to call this Assembly Committee on Judiciary meeting to order. Madam Secretary, would you please call the roll?
Assemblywoman Bilbray Axelrod. Assemblywoman Cohen.
I'm here, Bilbray Axelrod, sorry.
Assemblywoman Cohen.
Here.
Assemblywoman Gonzalez.
Here.
Assemblywoman Hanson.
Here.
Assemblywoman Hardy.
Here.
Assemblywoman Kasama.
Here.
Assemblywoman Krasner. Assemblywoman Marzola.
Here.
Assemblyman Miller.
Assemblyman Miller, we are having trouble hearing you. If you could go down to the bottom left corner of your screen and toggle on your microphone options. And you can switch between microphone and same as system.
Can you hear me now?
Perfect. Yes, we can.
Yes. Here.
Assemblywoman Nguyen.
Here.
Assemblyman O'Neill.
Here.
Assemblyman Orentlicker.
Here.
Assemblywoman Summers Armstrong.
Here.
Assemblyman Wheeler.
Here.
Chairman Yeager.
Here. We do have a quorum, and Madam Secretary, could you mark any members who are not yet present when they arrive? I know some folks are still running late this morning. Again, I want to wish everyone on this Zoom meeting good morning. There are a lot of us on this call today, and I want to welcome and wish good morning to those watching over the internet, either on the legislature's website or our YouTube channel. Welcome to day 3 of the 81st session of the Nevada Legislature. Just a couple of housekeeping matters that I'll go over to remind folks. For those of you on the Zoom, if you're not speaking, please mute your microphone so we can make sure we eliminate any feedback. And then really the only other two I wanted to mention is we certainly expect courtesy and respect in the way we treat one another and our presenters in the meeting today. And I wanted to remind folks on the Zoom and in the public that because of this virtual meeting, many of the members are operating with multiple screens in their offices to try to be on Zoom and to view exhibits. So if we have to look away from the screen, don't take that as a sign of inattention. We're most likely trying to look at an exhibit on another device. I think some of us in the committee feel like we are in gaming tournaments with a number of monitors and devices that we have to make this successful. So please don't take offense to that. We're just trying to keep up with everything. So, with that being said, I'm going to go into our agenda. Members, as you can see, we have 3 presentations today. So we're going to run much like we did yesterday, where we'll allow our presenters time to get through their information, and then we'll have time for questions at the end. So at this time, I'm going to open up the presentation on the overview of the Department of Public Safety. I know many of the folks that are on the Zoom today are with the Department of Public Safety in some way. I don't think they're all going to be presenting, but they are here if we have specific questions. So I want to welcome Director George Tagliati to the meeting. And before you get started, Director, I just wanted to say over the interim, it's been a real pleasure to work with you and your team. I was looking at your organizational chart, and I think I've probably been in contact with almost everybody in every part of your agency on different matters and bills over the interim, and they have just been fantastic to work with, very responsive. So I wanted to commend you for that. And again, welcome to the meeting, and feel free to introduce whoever you would like, and then go into your presentation, and we'll have some questions at the end.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. That's very, very kind. I really appreciate that. Good morning, everyone. I'm going to be brief, but first I want to thank my team for their efforts in preparing this presentation that we're going to have this morning. We all know these are rather challenging times, to say the least, looking forward over the next year or two. And we have pretty much understood our job is to do more with less. And so, for example, with our investigative division, and our Capitol Police, you'll be hearing about the more requests that we've had for services, but a wider range of services. Now we're more involved in protests and threats to organizations and buildings, and even to some of our elected officials. Also, the nationwide focus now in law enforcement is on not only criminal justice reform, but on domestic terrorism. The investigative division is a key player in our intelligence gathering and also our homeland security efforts. Coincidentally, I'm going to be attending in 2021 this year, the National Executive Leadership Institute in Washington, D.C. And their priorities for 2021 are, in fact, recruitment and retention in law enforcement and criminal justice reform. So that should be an interesting study, and we should be able to have a really great dialogue back there and be able to glean some information from that group. So we're also going to talk today about some of our initiatives, and we realize that budgets are tight, but these initiatives, I think, are such that they're extremely timely. And two that I'll mention are the Division of Emergency Management that's presently with the Department of Public Safety. Early on, when COVID pandemic first hit, we had a number of conversations within DEM and also the governor's office and with the National Guard. And clearly, we understood that this was a different type of attack, if you will, on our state, and we had to handle it and take a different approach. So, can you hear me okay?
Speak up a
little louder? Okay.
Yeah, Director, I just want to let you know, I have headphones on, so I can hear you just fine, but I think perhaps some of the members who are just using their laptop audio, so I would ask the members maybe to either turn up your volume, or Director, if you could speak up a little bit, I think it would be helpful.
Okay, we're in a big room here, so I'm some distance with social distancing away from the mic. Anyway, I hope this is better. Well, so among the initiatives we're going to just discuss this morning, the two that are of interest is one is the movement of transfer, if you will, of the Division of Emergency Management from the Department of Public Safety to the Office of the Military, the National Guard. And with discussions that we had at the very beginning of the pandemic, we realized that certainly the National Guard was more prepared to support this effort with the resources they have, the close nexus to federal government. They have airplanes, they have helicopters, they have doctors, they have medics, and they have equipment. And if you, in retrospect, if you look at certain natural disasters that do occur, the National Guard is right there, and they're our first line of defense, whether it's wildfires or earthquakes or whatever. So a strong consideration was made, and we have this year worked hand in glove with the National Guard and General Andre Barry and his team, and they've done a fantastic job in supporting the efforts for responding to the COVID pandemic. But going forward, we're more or less, I hesitate to say use an Arizona model, but there are some states where the Emergency Management Division is under the Office of the Military and the National Guard, and that is, without belaboring the point, that's part of our proposal there. Also, the second one I just want to address is a state laboratory, which right now in 2021, there are two states that don't have a state laboratory. It's Nevada and Hawaii. So you may think the timing is kind of odd for this, but we would like to have a state laboratory for forensics, as do other states. And the reason being that right now we have two major labs, one in Washoe County and one in Clark. And as the state grows and we see the need going forward for having, again, a separate state laboratory. And why the timing is important now is quite seriously, is to just get people talking about it. We're not looking to build this building this week or maybe this year or next year, but I think it's extremely important that we just have it as a matter of discussion so that we can prepare for the coming years because of the advent of cannabis and the legalization of recreational use of marijuana. We've had discussions not only with the governor's office, but also with Tyler Klimas and the folks on the cannabis board as far as what are their procedures right now, how are we going to handle the quality control and the inconsistencies that may develop in whatever the product is, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. So that is a strong consideration right now to take a look at that. And I think it could be a win-win for the state. So I said I'd be brief, and I want to, again, thank my team. I want to thank you for your time. And I would like to introduce my Deputy Director, Sherry Bergerman. Sherry, can you hear me? You online?
Yes, I'm online, sir, and I'm ready to go.
And we are all going to be here for any questions that you may have. And so I will turn it over to Sherry to proceed with the presentation.
And Kim, can you get the presentation up for me, please? Good morning, Chairman Yeager and committee members. I know how important your time is today, and I know you probably have a list of questions for us. So I'm going to be as brief as I possibly can, knowing that you've had the slides for, I don't know, maybe a few hours. But if you have any questions, we will take them at the end of the department overviews presentation, and then start the parole and probation presentation following that, and then go through with the same kind of methodology. So we are the Department of Public Safety, and if you move on to the organizational chart, you'll see all our bright, shiny faces that you probably will hear from a lot during the session, as well as between sessions. The director's office definitely handles policy for the department. We provide for fiscal services, legal services, and human resources services to all of our divisions. And of course, we've got the fiscal oversight, the accounting, budgeting, and payroll, public records requests, _, dignitary protection. And all of that is pretty much the same as it has been over the years. So I am going to turn this over to Curtis Palmer. He is our senior fiscal manager, and I'm going to dare him to be as quick as I was last year going through the slides. So Curtis, are you ready?
Thank you, Sherry. Good morning, Chairman Yeager and committee. For the record, my name is Curtis Palmer, the ASO4 for the Department of Public Safety. And yes, I will go quickly. So just touching briefly on some of our different divisions within the department. So beginning with training, we have two training academies, one in the north, one in the south, 4 training academies per year. And they are accountable and responsible to the peace officer standards and training or post. Our Office of Professional Responsibility is administrative investigations of department employees. They provide training and misconduct prevention. Capitol Police serve and protect our Capitol buildings and grounds, and respond to investigating crimes and threats against state employees. Our Highway Patrol, of course, enforces traffic laws, investigates traffic crashes, arrests, and so forth. They also handle our criminal interdiction program and handle canine dogs, as well as other interdiction tools. Our Office of Traffic Safety administers the state's highway safety program and subgrants. They're also co-leaders with NDOT and the state's strategic highway safety plan. They also manage the Nevada Rider program and manage the fatality analysis reporting system, or FARS. They're also involved in addressing teen safe driving, impaired driving, and child passenger safety installation. Our investigations division handles major crimes, drug enforcement, vehicle theft interdiction, school safety with the Safe Voice program, and also manage our threat analysis center to detect and prevent and mitigate terrorism. Our state fire marshal develops and enforces fire code and regulations, reviews building plans, and issues licenses and registrations for fire protective related companies. They also issue permit for hazardous material storage and provide some fire prevention education. Our Office of Cyber Defense Coordination is responsible for risk-based assessments of state agency information systems. They create quarterly and annual reports regarding preparedness of the state and regulate some state agencies. Our Records and Communication Compliance Division is made up of 14 disparate programs. Our Communications Bureau handles the dispatch and warrants unit. Records Bureau handles our central record repository for Nevada criminal history, as well as Nevada offense codes, or NOx. We'll be hearing about that throughout session. And sex offender registry and point of contact for firearms sales. And they are also in the middle of an insidious modernization program, which is a 20-year-old program that is being updated and is an extensive project, biennial, multi-million-dollar implementation program. Going on to the Office of Criminal Justice Assistance. They're the state administrative agency and working with the Department of Justice and provide sub-grant awards and secure a lot of dollars for the state of Nevada. Emergency management and Homeland Security, of course, their responsibility is to reduce the impacts of emergency, help with emergency preparedness, both of natural and human caused. And as the director had mentioned, the governor recommends transferring those their operations over to the Office of Military, and they handle currently about $229 million in federal funds. And with that, that's the overview of the Department of Public Safety. Our next up would be Parole and Probation. We'll go into a little bit more detail, but perhaps we could stop here for a moment and answer any questions that you may have.
Yeah, thank you so much for the presentation. I give you guys certainly an award for being brief. Those were a lot of slides, and I appreciate the details. And I want to thank you too for the photos that you put on the organizational chart. I think that's really helpful to see faces next to the names. So I don't know who came up with that idea, but very well done. I think it's useful for the committee. Before I open up for questions, I did want to note, because I hadn't had a chance to connect with them yet, and let Assemblyman O'Neill know that we are going to hear a presentation, not today, but later, either next week or the week after, from the Criminal Records Repository. Assemblyman O'Neill had requested some more in-depth information. So I wanted to let you know, Assemblyman, we don't have that ready to go today, but we are going to hear a standalone presentation. So I would ask you to sort of hold any questions for that particular topic until we hear that presentation. But so that being said, let me go into the gallery view mode here and ask if anybody has questions based on what we've heard so far. It looks like Assemblyman O'Neill and then Assemblywoman Kasama. So we'll go in that order so far. Go ahead, Assemblyman O'Neill.
Thank you, Chair. Director Tagliati, first I want to welcome you back. I'm glad that you're back at DPS, and I know you'll be back. Your plans for the future of the department are excellent. But if I may, I got a question. You're moving DEM over to the Guard. Is the NTAC also part of DEM? Will they go too?
Excellent, George Tagliati for the record. Excellent question, Sam. And thank you for the kind remarks. Since I was in this position some years ago, it's kind of developed within the DEM that the homeless land security piece and the DEM, particularly because of the finances and the federal funding, are really intertwined. So when we took a look at this, we felt that the best part of it, the best piece, or the best way to cut it into pieces, was to take the pure emergency management side of the house, move it toward the National Guard, but yet retain the Homeland Security piece. I'm sure my opening remarks. So the Homeland Security Advisor is still appointed by the governor. And today that Homeland Security Advisor is INA, and presumably would be the director of the Department of Public Safety. With that, NTAC, as you referred to, those of you not familiar with it, is a fusion center. It's an intelligence base. That also remains within the Department of Public Safety. within the investigative division. So we're more or less taking law enforcement piece of it, keeping that inside the Department of Public Safety. But all the other hazards and dangers and disasters that could occur within the state, moving that over to, and the control of that over to the National Guard, who are better prepared in response. In the meantime, as far as resiliency committees and the Homeland Security Committee, DEM will still be involved because of the financial connections with the federal government and all various fundings with FEMA and so on and so forth. So it's kind of a hybrid design, but simply law enforcement stays with us, Homeland Security matters, and other hazards and other threats to the state will go over to the military.
Thank you. I just wanted to clarify that. And may I also ask another question, Chair, on the laboratory?
Yes, please go ahead.
Thank you, sir. Director, on the lab, will that just be for DPS personnel, or will it also be supporting the counties? And part of that too is, where does Metro and Washoe County, are they supportive of separating out the lab services?
George Tagliati again for the record. What we have now is, it's still actually up for discussion, but our plan, and we've had meetings with Washoe County and also with Clark County in their laboratories. And our preliminary discussions are such that if from the forensic part of it, we would, it's two pieces, forensic and then the cannabis. The forensic part of it, right now, the state would, state laboratory would take those forensics that come, say, from state agencies, highway patrol, et cetera, or any county that wanted to submit it to the state, and they would process. As it stands right now, it either goes to Washoe County or it goes to Clark County, and we pay fees for that. So this would sort of remove those, well, we would remove those fees and payments that we're making to the county, and those fees would be adjusted or somehow made through the state laboratory. So that piece of it would change. We also discussed that there's a fair amount of federal grants that are involved with laboratories. We certainly wouldn't want to shortchange Washoe County Lab or Henderson Lab or Clark County Labs. So again, we want this to be a cooperative effort, because as the state grows, we can see that there's going to be more and more work for all of these laboratories. Now you add the cannabis piece of it. And right now, and I don't want to speak for the cannabis folks, but what I've learned from our discussions with them is that right now all of the laboratory work is outsourced to a number of different laboratories throughout the state, which again, I think a centralization in one state laboratory that's certified will guarantee, again, a little bit more control over quality control and assurance of product, not only quality of product, but the potency of product, et cetera, et cetera. So when you're dealing with the regulatory aspects of state control, if you will, over the cannabis sale, distribution, to have a state laboratory where we can centralize all of the science of it and any kind of research there may be. The Office of Traffic Safety also has a role in this, if you will, because with the NHTSA, the federal people who are involved with traffic safety, their concern also is impaired driving. So there's a whole world of out there of folks that are studying the comorbidity of drugs and alcohol and mixture of both and so on and so forth. And my understanding is too often when we engage people who are driving under the influence, the quick fix may be the fact that they smell alcohol and someone is charged with, say, a DUI for having alcohol, when in fact they could not only have alcohol, but they could also have all kinds of drugs in their system, prescription drugs or whatever. So part of the science behind that again, I'm not an expert in this, but part of the science behind that Office of Traffic Safety and federal people at NHTSA struggle with is, what are the true numbers for impaired driving? Are impaired drivers limited to, all these people on strictly alcohol, or is the real problem here say, prescription drugs, or is it cannabis? And so going forward now, the fact that the state of Nevada has legalized cannabis, I think it's also part of our responsibility to join in on that type of research, to look and see exactly where our problems may be, where we need to focus more of our efforts. And looking at all the labs around the state, again, I'm kind of speaking for them, but in our discussions with them, no one is really prepared or has an inclination to want to engage taking on all that cannabis work. So there again, it gives us, it kind of goes back to us thinking again, geez, wouldn't it be great when we had a state lab, which again, we were a long time coming on that, to take into forensics as the state grows, more and more demand for samples to be taken and analyzed, that this state lab can pick up that part of the work and then also do the cannabis part of the work. And then as years go by, it would just grow. You can see the revenue there, because right now people were outsourcing it all from cannabis. So there would be revenue to the state laboratory. And we have some numbers, rough numbers on what we've done in that area. And also the money as far as payment to other laboratories. That money would be again taken into the state laboratory. So would it pay for itself eventually over the years, and so on and so forth? And we've taken a look at that. So what we'd like to do is right now with this session, get it in everybody's view, get it out there and start to chatter and get everybody taking a look at it to say, hey, I think this is viable. I think this is something we should have in the next few years, and move forward and get the best model we possibly can.
Thank you, Director. And Assemblyman O'Neill, I'll mention as well. I chaired an interim committee on driving under the influence of cannabis, and I think we'll see some legislation based on that. But I was very surprised to learn that our labs don't test consistently. Exactly what the director said. There are certain labs that if you get an alcohol positive, they don't test for anything else, even if there are indicators that someone ingested other substances. So it just makes it really hard to know what's happening out there. And if you're interested further in this topic, I would certainly recommend Amy Davey from the Office of Traffic Safety. I think she's on the call as well. I know she's done a lot of work on this, and there are a lot of documents and studies and consultants who kind of looked into this issue. And as the director said, I don't know it's something that we're going to take up this session, but I think it's worthy of consideration. But I certainly would encourage you to connect with Miss Davey, who has been a really great resource on this.
Well, if I may, Chair, I appreciate the answer and the director's attitude or planning for it. I personally, we have said for years that we should have a state laboratory. And with, as you were saying, the cannabis and the additional demands being put out there now, I strongly support it. I just wanted to get some clarification on a few parts of it, because I know the department is also obligated to take care of the rural county sheriff's offices, et cetera. So I want to thank the director for his planning in the future and your information on it also, Chair. So thank you for allowing me the time. I appreciate it.
You're welcome. Let's go next. I think Assemblywoman Kasama had raised her hand, so we'll go next to her for a question.
Yes, thank you. And thank you, Director Tagliati, for that great overview and information. My question also related to the lab, so you've answered the majority of that. Thank you very much. The only question I might have is, is the current county labs, meeting the need that is there? And you're talking about a state lab. How far out in the future do you think the county labs can no longer meet that need? Are you looking at a 3-year window, a 5-year? Just for, I know you can't be held to this, but how long do you think in the future this would be a must to have to meet the demand?
George Tagliati for the record. I would think if we take a look this session, I would think within the next, by next session, we should be looking about, and a little bit of recovery from COVID. We have other funding streams, and I think because of our involvement with the federal government, with Office of Traffic Safety, and I can have Amy elaborate just a bit on it. We can find some other funding to help support the effort, but I would think within the next couple of years, I'd like to see it moving forward. But I don't recall exactly the amount, but if Amy or Sherry could tell me the exact amount we put up for this session as far as for preliminary study. Sherry, you online?
Yes, I am on the line. I believe it's around $600,000 for the preliminary study. And then next session or the session following, we'd be looking at hopefully starting the build or the planning. With regard to how much the labs can handle right now, there already is issues with backlogs so that people are pick and choose which cases to push through the labs and prioritize them. So it's just a function of our internal need right now in terms of the number of bloods we store in our evidence vault. We have quite a bit. Everything else we've talked about isn't available to us now with the labs. So this is something that we need really yesterday, but as we begin to move, I don't think the labs will feel the pinch. If anything, I think it could relieve them of some of the extra workload that they have to struggle with.
Thank you so much for that clarification.
I'm going to go next to Assemblywoman Summers Armstrong.
Thank you, Chair. Director Tagliati, this is Assemblywoman Chandra Summers Armstrong from AD6. And I have a question about the redistribution of staff in the Department of Emergency Management. If that department or some of those tasks move under the National Guard, how will that affect your staffing? Will you lose staff? Will you have to reassign or retrain? Will those jobs go away? Could you speak to that, please? Thank you.
George Tagliati for the record. I don't anticipate any reduction in staff. It is just going to be, I've had some conversations with General Berry, and we're both on the same page. We'll just shift over responsibilities within this, basically shifting an org chart. We keep the law enforcement side, and they handle the other side. We deal very closely with them anyway. And in dealing with the Homeland Security Commission, and the funding with FEMA, pretty much the world remains the same. We've been acting in that capacity now for, I would say, since last March, where it's kind of been a two-headed monster, where DEM is keeping the National Guard and reporting to the general, and then also reporting to us. So I think what we want to do is formalize it, where all hazards, with the exception of law enforcement, go to the National Guard and General Berry's team. I don't see any reduction in staff. I don't see any changes in location, vehicles, really anything. It's more just an administrative move in the chain of command.
Chair, if I may ask one follow-up question. And this
Yeah, please go ahead.
Thank you so much. This question is for, I can't see your full last name, Ms. Sherry. This is Chandra Summers Armstrong again, AD6. Regarding the lab, are there any grant funding opportunities available because of COVID and our need just for more testing in general to move along your desire to fund the study and then maybe even get started on implementing the new statewide lab?
Yes, this is Sherry Brickman for the record. Yes, you can hear me. We definitely have already used federal funding to do a study, conduct a study, and we can get you a copy of that study. Amy Davey has been our spearhead person on getting us not only the funding to conduct the study, but keeping that all in one hat, basically, so that you can review the recommendations in detail if you'd like. With regard to building the lab, the federal funds cannot be used for any CIP, anything that is going to belong to the state later on. However, federal funding would more than likely be available for different pieces of equipment that might be needed for the lab. possibly funding experts in some areas in order to go determine priorities or different types of equipment. So NHTSA, the National Highway Granting Group, are very, very supportive of the lab, very supportive of the lab. So they are keeping in touch with us, and I think we would get a lot of support once we have it built. What other discussion was underway was doing a temporary lab where we rent the space, buy the equipment, staff it, and then the day that the permanent lab is ready, move them in. But again, that's a financial burden. I don't believe the state was ready at this time to commit to. But that is also something we can do and down the line. Unfortunately, again, when we're talking about building, the feds can't assist us with that.
And I'll note on the chat that Amy Davey had indicated that she does have the state lab assessment report. So Ms. Davey, I think you sent that to me previously, but if you wouldn't mind just emailing it to me, I will make sure it gets out to members of the committee. It's pretty lengthy, but it's a very interesting read. And I'll also remind members of this committee, we're not the money committee, and this idea is not yet in front of us in bill form. But if and when it becomes a bill, I anticipate, there would be a policy discussion in one of the committees about whether it's a good idea to create a state lab. And then, the money part of that would be handled by the Ways and Means and Senate Finance Committee, and they'd have to figure that all out. So right now, I think this is just kind of a preview of what we could see in future sessions if any of us return for future sessions. So just kind of keep that in the back of your mind, and I'll make sure to distribute that report when I get it to the committee members. Let's see, do we have other questions before we move on to parole and probation? Assemblyman Wheeler, please go ahead.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Really not a question, but I just wanted to thank Mr. Tagliotti, the director, for helping me through some times with my constituents in March when the shutdowns first hit. All of a sudden, we were getting 250, 300,000 background checks a week. And they were having a lot of problems getting those checks through because they were just overwhelmed. And he was able to answer my constituents' questions and kind of calm everybody down a little bit. So I just wanted to say thank you very much for the good work, George.
And Assemblyman Wheeler, I just remind you that we try not to use first names in the committee.
I'm sorry.
I know you know that, but just to model good habits for our new members. So let's see. Do we have other questions? I'm in the gallery view. Raise your hand if you have any questions for our presenters thus far. I don't see anybody. So Director, I know we're gonna move. Oh, Director, do you want to mention something else? I see you have a hand up.
Yes, thank you. George Tagliani again for the record. I just, when we talk about the lab, we've discussed the forensic side of it a bit. We also have Tyler Klimas and the cannabis folks can really provide a lot of information as far as their research, their budgets, how much is being spent right now, and so on and so forth, and what they would see their future to be with a state laboratory to handle their needs. And that's a whole other story that they're experts in, and that they're very supportive of this laboratory. So I think that'll be a great value to the committee and to the whole legislature.
Thank you for that, Director. And committee, we are going to hear from the Cannabis Compliance Board tomorrow. So we'll have a chance to ask Executive Director Klimas about that if any of you are interested in that topic. So last call for questions before we move on. I don't see any. Director, I know you have a lot of people on the call. All of you are certainly welcome to stay on as we go through parole and probation, but we will not be offended if anyone has to drop off and get back to their regularly scheduled Wednesday activities.
Good morning. This is Sherry Brigham, Deputy Director for the Department of Public Safety. I'd just like to introduce Tom Lawson, our new Chief of Parole and Probation, who's going to spend some time with you going over the changes that they have been going through. And I will stay on in case any questions come up for fiscal. But other than that, any of the Staff, please feel free to drop out, probably clear up some of the slowdowns too. Thank you.
Thank you, and welcome, Mr. Lawson. I don't know that we've had a chance to work together intimately yet, but obviously parole and probation is a very significant part of the criminal justice system, and I know we'll be reaching out to you and hearing from you as we go through the session. So welcome to the committee, and please proceed with your presentation.
Thank you. Kim, would you bring the presentation back up, please? While she's doing that, thank you, Chairman Yeager and members of the committee. Thank you for your invitation to speak to you today. My name is Tom Lawson. I did have a chance to work with you during last session and present a few bills. AB 69 was one of them we discussed. And I'm looking forward to those same opportunities during this session. Let me introduce my staff, my key members of my staff. Major Sherry Sleva is our Deputy Chief in the Southern Command in Las Vegas. She's not on the presenter call, but is watching via the legislative link today. With me in Carson City, off camera, are Major Stephanie O'Rourke. She's the Northern Command Deputy Chief, available to assist with questions, as well as our Administrative Services Officer, Sue Sieber, should those type of questions come up. I'd like to go through our entire presentation and then answer questions at the end, but if there's any pressing question you'd like me to stop at any slide, please give me the high sign and I will pause for your questions. Next slide, please. These first few slides are just general overview, and I don't want to spend the committee's time reading them, so I'll read through these fairly quickly and then focus on the initiatives. But going back to mission and vision, as you're aware, the division is accountable for community supervision of parolees, probationers, lifetime sex offenders, and inmates who are conditionally released from NDOC facilities. Additionally, we transfer out and accept individuals on supervision from other states via the Federal Interstate Compact Agreement. This describes where our offices are, and we'll cover that a little later in our staffing as well. Our program descriptions, this slide talks about some of the specific actions we conduct, assisting the district courts with pre-sentence investigations, the Board of Pardons Commissioners with pardons investigations, and our supervision elements, and collection of restitution and payments for victims of crimes, etc. So legislative initiatives, next slide. This is where we'll slow down the pace a little bit and get a little more into the meat and potatoes of our initiatives. And the first one, this is our really reinventing supervision thought in terms of addressing our low-risk supervision, how we're supervising the low-risk offenders. And this is really a drastic change to our methodology. Currently, there's a supervision ratio of 1 officer to 150 low-risk supervision offenders, and we're looking to change that methodology considerably. First and foremost, we're looking to address the best practices in community supervision, where studies have shown that actually the over-supervision of the low-risk offender will induce the low-risk offender to recidivate as opposed to preventing recidivism. So by scaling back the officer involvement with these low-risk offenders, and in terms of following those best practices studies, we're reducing our potential to induce recidivism, while still providing those essential services in terms of supervision, as well as counseling and providing them opportunities for support in the community, etc. So the secondary reason is this also addresses a retention concern we have, is that we have a hard time retaining officers, and by looking to shift some of those responsibilities that can be shifted away from the sworn staff to the non-sworn staff, which we typically have a little better retention rate to. We hope to create consistency with the supervision, as well as providing some of those essential supervision services at a lower pay rate provides efficiency. And so this is our efficiency decision unit, because overall it does result in a savings to the state with the changes we're looking at making. So with the supervision model, let's go to the next slide, please. This gives a graphic representation of the current structure on the left, where we have a sergeant supervising 6 officers, and each officer supervises their caseload of 150 offenders. In this structure, the officer performs every supervision function. They are all things to every one of their offenders, from the administrative functions of travel passes to monitoring timelines in terms of good time credit calculations to collecting fines and fees, things like that. Where on the right side, here's our graphic of our amended model, where we have an officer who is ultimately responsible for the law enforcement supervision of 500 offenders. And then the key point of this is that in order to allow the officer to oversee those 500 offenders instead of 150, we have 2 parole and probation specialists who would each cover about 250 of those offenders. And the specialist would perform all of the administrative supervision functions that don't require peace officer powers. That would free up the officer to focus just on the violations of those who, or the attention to those who are non-compliant with that, their terms of supervision, and not needing to focus on the people who are compliant with supervision. So an offender who is completely compliant with all the terms or conditions may only see their officer a few times during their term of supervision. Because if they're following all the rules, there isn't the necessity to have routine interaction with the officer, which follows the best practices of community supervision. And so the second caseload change to this is that our sergeants are typically allocated based on the premise of that each sergeant supervises 6 officers without consideration for the non-sworn staff that may or may not be in their span of control depending on their office location. In this model, the sergeants assigned to this low-risk supervision pod their supervision and span of control would be 6 total employees consisting of the 4 specialists and the 2 officers. And as I mentioned before, that ultimately this concept of shifting some of the supervision and responsibility to a parole and probation specialist results in a savings to the state. And we would realize that savings not through the creation of new specialist positions, I guess, but through downgrading of vacant officer positions. These are positions that have historically been vacant. We have a hard time keeping or hiring and retaining officers. And so we're looking at using the existing vacancy rate to downgrade officers into specialist positions to facilitate this concept. If we can go to the next slide, please. Next of our initiatives is the Indigent Funding Housing Assistance Program. This program started in 2017 and has been very effective. We have funding available to help those inmates who are releasing from correctional facilities who don't have the means to provide housing for themselves. When we started this program, it was initially in 2017 started with some seed money that was transferred from NDOC's program account into ours, as well as some additional funding. At that time, we started the program with the notion, following NDOC's, lead on this, of how they were running their program, looking at $500 per offender. And what we found is, as this program has progressed, is that $500 did what it was intended to do. It got those offenders releasing from custody into a housing situation where one wasn't available before. But at that price point, we realized that we weren't really providing a great housing opportunity to them. Typically, releasing offenders, not always the clientele that many vendors would like to have in their properties. And so we started to explore opportunities to look at placement programs, residence programs that provide some combination of housing and wraparound services to those offenders. The thought being that the more support we give them immediately upon receipt, the less opportunity or the less to lower the chances that they would recidivate and establish themselves and be able to take on their housing responsibilities at the ending of the money. So in 2019, we started a pilot to expand the pool of money to $1,000 per offender. And we found that that was very successful because it did open up a lot of opportunities for programs where you had residence programs to address substance abuse issues, to provide counseling in addition to the residency as they exited prison. And that has been also very successful. Following our implementation of that program, we did a study to compare parolees that were exiting prison, indigent funding versus non-indigent funding, to see what the success of that program was. And those receiving indigent funding after 30 days averaged 48, those who had of our sample group, those who were employed at 30 days post-release was 48.5%. Those not receiving indigent funding was only 18%. Those who had been arrested within 30 days of release or were on the path to absconding, because due to the change in the absconding definition, you can't abscond within 30 days anymore, but were not making contact and on the path to becoming an absconder. Those receiving indigent funding was 9%, and those not receiving indigent funding in that control group were 45%. And so this program has had a drastic effect on providing that immediate stability to those inmates releasing from prison as it was designed. And so we're very thankful for the governor for including this in his recommended budget as an ongoing program. Next slide, please. In terms of staffing and vacancies, we continue to work diligently to fill all of our vacancies. Due to the pandemic, we have a number of frozen positions, which has caused our vacancy rate to spike. But we're working as best we can to fill our academies with our officer positions, given the limitations and the competitive market that that all law enforcement agencies are experiencing right now. We do have a significant attrition rate due to other employment opportunities and retirements. We routinely lose officers to other agencies who are able to provide a more competitive wage and benefits. And we currently have 609 positions allocated to us, and our vacancy rate overall is 20%, with 123 vacant positions as of January. The recommended budget continues at 609 positions. And I do want to note that with the JFA statistics and the reports that come out, the next report is due mid-March, and most of our maintenance and enhancement units that relate to staffing will be adjusted mid-session, as they historically are, with the new JFA numbers coming out, because based on our caseload, that determines the number of positions that were allocated. This slide shows our breakdown of our offender population between parolees, probationers, and our conditional release offenders and lifetime sex offenders. The next slide, please. The division has one executive bill draft, AB 17, has been pre-filed, and this is looking to make changes to the language regarding discharge from both probation and parole. Over the years, the statutes have changed to, return civil rights to the offenders upon discharge. And there's been a number of statutes over the past 3 sessions that have really eliminated the distinction between an honorable and a dishonorable discharge for both probationers and parolees. There are a number of offenders who are compliant with their terms of supervision, given their life and their employment opportunities and their salary as best they can. However, they don't qualify for an honorable discharge, and they get a dishonorable discharge. Likewise, there are offenders who are relatively non-compliant and commit a number of technical violations to still qualify for an honorable discharge. And so we're at the point where the honorable versus dishonorable is really just an adjective, maybe an adverb, depending on how you're using it in the sentence. But the distinction isn't there anymore of who got their rights back. Is this a representation of their actual behavior while under supervision? And so We've had some side conversations with a number of stakeholders regarding this bill. We've reached out to the ACLU and Holly Wellborn. We've talked to the public defenders groups of Kinder Birchie and John Pirro. We've talked to the prosecutors groups about this. And also we've talked to the Office of Sentencing Policy. The Office of Sentencing Policy, upon introduction, we plan on asking for consideration of a friendly amendment to the language that was drafted. And the Sentencing Policy Office has asked for some conforming changes to the reporting elements tied into AB 236 of last year, just to mirror the language that we're looking to change in terms of this bill. So moving forward, should this bill be approved, all discharges would be a general discharge. The benefit to the division is that it simplifies the discharge process. To the offender, it removes that distinction of honorable versus dishonorable, and because there is no difference in restoration of rights anymore. One thing we've noticed and was a concern in drafting this is that there are a few offenders who are really in a discharge limbo, where we've submitted a discharge request, and for whatever reason, it just hasn't been processed by the courts. And in those cases, the offender is technically not under supervision because they've expired their term of supervision and can't be supervised legally by us. We don't have the authority to exercise control over their behavior anymore, but they technically haven't been received their discharge paperwork because of the agreement of whether that should be an honorable or a dishonorable discharge. This bill would also simplify those cases where they're just discharged from supervision. Anyway, I look forward to having additional conversations should this be called for introduction. And lastly, we have a video. I've got my fingers crossed that this is working. We have worked in test. If not, we have a YouTube link that we can share with you as well.
I have a few older brothers who work in law enforcement, and seeing them do their jobs and succeed and take pride in what they do really inspired me to follow in their footsteps.
And the whole goal is just to make people successful and become mothers and fathers, much like I am, as you can see behind me, my wife, and I have 4 sons. And nothing makes me prouder than to see an offender finally get off of probation, and I see them out with their children and maybe even having a good job.
Those percentages that don't fall within the success stories, they are out in our community. They're out there committing new crimes and doing things they shouldn't be. And so it's really rewarding to be on the side of figuring out what they're doing, stopping them from doing it, and if they do it, hold them accountable.
We are in a hard time where people are not very fond of law enforcement, but I don't let that affect me at all. I always treat people with respect. I always, I carry around stickers, I carry around fidget spinners for the kids I'm around. I always want them to have a positive interaction with law enforcement.
The point of parole and probation is us to supervise somebody that has a past history of criminal history, whether it be violent or drugs. We're able to hopefully get them away from that, and given all the opportunities that we have with counseling and things that we are provided, we're able to set them straight.
We can help assist the offender on multiple different aspects, get communication from the counselor so we know what we can better do to serve the offender, not just dictating to them and telling them to abide by their conditions of supervision.
We, as an organization or a division, go out of our way to afford every offender an opportunity.
This video, we tell this why we serve, and it's our employees' view of their job in their own words. We asked for some volunteers, and we thank the people who were willing to speak on camera to you today. With that, I will open up to any questions, and I guess in housekeeping, Mr. Chairman, would I be able to speak directly to the members, or should I address my responses to you?
Thank you, Director Lawson. Feel free just to go directly to the members, unless you like to do it otherwise. I know some people like the formality of that, but it's not necessary in the committee. And yeah, certainly we've worked together in the past on legislation, and I appreciate that. We haven't had a chance to work together yet in your new role, but I know that we're going to. Before we take questions, I do want to let members know we had some discussion about Assembly Bill 17. Today is not the hearing for that, so if you have questions about Assembly Bill 17, the general discharge, I'd ask you to hold those until we actually have a hearing on that bill, and we'll have a chance to vet it in a little more detail, get some background, get some support, some opposition. I think today was kind of a preview, and I do intend to hear that bill hopefully in the next couple of weeks or next few weeks. So far I have some questions, but I'm going to hold off because I think my members normally cover my questions as well because they're good like that. So far I have a couple people in the queue. I have Assemblywoman Cohen and Assemblyman Miller. It used to be Assemblywoman Miller. I get that confused. So it's Assemblyman Miller. I see that Assemblywoman Kasama has a question. So far we'll go in the order of those three, and then we'll take up additional questions. So please go ahead, Assemblywoman Cohen.
Thank you, Chair, and thank you, Director Lawson, for the presentation. I have a question about the day reporting center. We had passed some legislation regarding that in 17. I toured the facility in 18, I think it was. And it seems like a program that had a lot of promise to help some of the clients who need some extra help get back into the program and kind of doing what they needed to do, because they certainly shouldn't have been headed back to prison or anything like that. But just what happened to it? It's down to, I think, as people may recall, it was a private-public partnership, and right now it's down to, I think, like 3 of the private employees is all, as opposed to before when the facility was full with PMP officers and the private company officers working kind of both ends of the spectrum, working the law enforcement and the more social work end, helping people with the drug issues and job searches, things like that. So if you could address that.
Thank you for your question. Yes, the daily reporting centers were funded in 2017, and they were up and running. The Las Vegas one started about 6 months before the Reno one. They were very successful in helping to, what their mission was initially was to be a kind of a last chance stop for offenders who were on the verge of being revoked and sent and incarcerated. And we realized the benefits of that program. We kind of expanded the scope of it to not just look at those as a last chance stop, but to offer those services to people who weren't on the verge of revocation. And it was very successful. The contract with the initial vendor was expiring. We went through an RFP process and selected a new vendor. And right about the time that that new vendor was ready to open the doors in the new locations, COVID hit. And due to distancing and in compliance with executive orders, we couldn't put the offenders into those confined spaces. And ultimately, the funding for those was reverted during the special session to address the shortfalls in the general fund, and it was not included in the recommended budget moving forward.
Follow-up, Chair?
Please go ahead.
So, okay, so I'm still kind of confused about the timeline because I happened to work in an office that bought the building where the Las Vegas Day Reporting Center was, and we moved in right as COVID hit, right as the lockdown started. So it was months before the special session, and it was already down to like 3 private officers. And I think they moved out last week, but there were still our parole and probationers were still reporting there to these 3 officers. I don't know exactly what services they were providing, but it was nothing like what the services that had been provided previously. But this seems to have been an issue before COVID hit. So if you could address that a little more.
Sure. I know that the director wants to chime in, so I'll give him I'll try to address your immediate question, then turn it over to the director for his comment as well. Yeah, the Daily Reporting Center in Las Vegas, ours for day reporting purposes closed last spring. There may have been some, I guess, house arrest follow-up there because we did have our house arrest unit kind of working out of that same office space. But the funding for that was reverted during the special session, and it certainly hasn't had any operation since July. I don't know the timing of where we moved out. I know the furniture for the day reporting center is in the warehouse in Las Vegas at our office. So I'm not sure about your timing that you're discussing there. But I think that might have been the residuals as the services were scaled back. Perhaps that was the house arrest unit that was still seeing clients there and not the day reporting center service.
Okay, because there are still daily, there are still parolees and probationers who are showing up and they're showing up at the office and they're doing some sort of something with the private company. But like I said, it's down to like the 3 people, and I don't know. So I guess that's part of the question in general, like what are our parole and probationers doing with this private company? And is that a contract that just is kind of going to expire, or, what services are they getting there?
Right. So at one point,
and I do know that I have seen like the house arrest. That makes sense because I do see your officers occasionally are there and they're bringing someone but it just is so odd considering how full that office had been and how clearly there were lots of services being provided.
Yes. We've also changed our house arrest vendor recently due to we went out to bid for that service as well. So I wouldn't expect there to be any more vendors at your location, because initially the first day reporting center vendor was the same vendor as our house arrest provider. And since first the day reporting center went to a new vendor under the RFP award, and then subsequently the house arrest has gone to a different vendor under the RFP award. So I wouldn't expect you to see any other parolees or probationers that are active supervision or our officers at that facility moving forward.
Right, and I know they did just move out a few days ago, but if maybe if I, instead of holding everyone else up, if I can get some further information about that timeline, because like I said, this was the week of we moved in the week of the lockout. So, and we're there with the 3, like I said, about 3 people from the private company. So clearly that was well before the budget cuts, and the program showed a lot of promise. I'm sure a lot of money was spent on it from the state's end, and I just want to know what happened to it, and if there are any plans to use that kind of program again.
I believe the director has his hand raised. I'll defer.
Please go ahead, Director.
George Tagliati, for the record, and Assemblywoman Cohen to respond. I agree with you. When I first arrived and had my tour of the day reporting centers, I really thought this is a really promising program, and we were really jazzed up about it. But what I'd like to do, maybe to clarify a little bit, is to ask Ann Carpenter, who's our colonel now with the Highway Patrol, who was a former chief of parole and probation, to give a little bit of history as far as what happened just prior, as far as the vendors just prior to COVID hitting, and then after COVID hit.
Ann Carpenter, for the record, Assemblywoman Cohen, just to kind of provide some clarification. Parole and probation went through an RFP process to have a different vendor. And so the vendor, the contract was approved, I believe, in February. And because it took so long for the new vendor to be approved and that sort of thing, we were trying to figure out how to work with the current vendor and transition to the new vendor, and then COVID hit. And so once that happened, we were still trying to transition, figuring that out, and then we figured out that we had to make budget cuts, and then the dairy reporting center was no longer a viable solution. So to hopefully answer your question, we were just transitioning to a different vendor, and so there was some difficulty trying to figure out how to transition, and then with COVID, and then having no funding. Does that make sense?
Okay, that does make a little more sense. I mean, I'm still kind of confused about why we still had our state parole and probationers reporting there over the last few months. But I can maybe talk to you a little more about that offline. And then maybe if we could get some statistics, if there are any statistics on what the success was over the time that the program was functional. I think a lot of us were hesitant with a private public partnership when it was presented to us, but did see, again, promise in the program, and maybe this is kind of another example of why we have issues with these private public partnerships, because when we have to change contracts and do that type of thing, when we're dealing with these vendors, we can have a program that's working well that just kind of falls apart and puts more strain on your department as well. But I'll discuss that more with you offline. Thank you, Chair.
You're welcome, Assemblywoman Cohen. We'll go next to Assemblyman Miller. And Assemblyman Miller, I apologize. You know, we had Assemblywoman Brittany Miller on this committee last year, so I'm probably going to call you Assemblywoman a few more times in the next few weeks. So please don't take that personally. It's just a habit from last session. So we're going to go to Assemblyman Miller.
It's all good. We probably should look at using assembly member at some point, but I'm good with the assemblyman, or whatever you call me. Chair is going to work. I do have a couple of questions. Thank you all for the presentation. I have a couple of questions regarding the staffing and vacancies. I noticed that there was 123, approximately 20% that are vacant, the roles. I'm curious to know if you have like a demographic breakdown of the roles that are filled. What regions are the vacancies in right now? And if there are strategies, what your strategies are to fill those roles. Thank you.
Thank you for your question, Assemblyman. Tom Lawson for the record. Sorry, I'm looking to the side so I can bring up my vacancy report and give you some little more specific information. And so Speaker Frierson, in our overall presentation to the Joint Money Committees, had asked some similar questions regarding our demographics, and we're compiling that, and we'll be happy to share that with you as well and the committee. As this comes up. Really, our vacancies are focused primarily in the urban areas. Las Vegas office has a significant number just because they have over 50% of our overall staff. But there are positions vacant. We have a number of our rural offices that are at 50% officer staffing. Some of the smaller offices, Ely is down to one officer. Winnemucca, I believe, is at one officer. So the lion's share certainly in the urban offices, but percentage-wise, I think we're a little harder hit in some of the smaller rural offices. Is there something, another specific thing I can ask? I'm sorry if I ramble. I'm just not sure exactly what you're looking for, sir.
Well, and it sounds like some of that information might be forthcoming, but Assembly Member Miller, do you have any follow-ups?
Yeah, I was also curious about two things, and if the information is coming at a later date, that'll be okay. What's the breakdown of the six of the positions that are filled, the demographic breakdown? So, you know, and then also, what are the strategies to recruit and fill these roles?
Thank you. This is Tom Moss again for the record. Our strategy to recruit is that we have a global recruitment strategy at the department level. With the force multiplying view of the department is that an officer can fill a number of roles throughout the department. And so we recruit on a global basis. We focus on those areas that we are traditionally more successful. In the past, we sent people to recruitment events in California at some of the junior colleges and things. But then when we are looking at the booth next to us for an agency that's paying, sometimes 50% more than we are, then it's very difficult to get any takers to show up for a test in those situations. So we scaled back from those recruiting events where we don't see a single candidate come out of those, and we focus on those where we have been more successful. We do regional recruiting events instead of just a localized recruiting. We do more regional events now. We publicize those much better. Kim Yoko Smith as our PIO has done an amazing job of getting the word out of when these are coming. We have meetings where our command and line staff go and meet with potential applicants to walk them through the process and tell them about the benefits of working with DPS and enforce that once you're within the doors of DPS, there are multiple opportunities to find your niche and your passion for law enforcement. Kim, would you like to chime in on some more additional?
And if I might chime in right before Kim, because Kim is doing such a good job. This is Sherry Brighamman, Deputy Director of the Department of Public Safety. We've had a lot of questions along those lines in terms of the demographics. And we've prepared a very large report for our last committee that I've instructed Curtis to send to you, Chairman Yeager, that you could distribute. But to answer Assemblyman Miller's question, we do very well in our applications coming in from our diverse population. If there's any work to be done, it's women in general. But for trying to give you a kind of overview, when we track this, we have a software program specifically for this purpose. And in 2019, a full year that wasn't COVID, the reported people, because some people don't report at all, but white alone was 36% of the applicant pool. And of course, the census data for Nevada is we are made up of 73.9%. Black alone was 12.5% of the applicant pool. And according to the US Census, compare that to 10.3% of the population. Asian alone was 3.7. And again, the census shows 8.7. And there's some smaller ones as well. And then we get to Hispanic is 23.3% of our applicant pool. And it is representative of the 29% of the population for the state of Nevada. So we found that females are still lower than we'd like to see them. And our diversity numbers are looking pretty strong. With respect to Hispanic, we continue to target our recruitment. And most recently, we've been coming up with new ways to have the communities embrace us and hopefully get the message out to all the people of the state. But we are actually chatting about a citizens committee or academy where we can show the citizens and send an invitation to a group of people to come out and see our use of force demonstration, because we have a new simulator coming with grant money. Thank you very much. that might be very interesting and fascinating. So we're trying to appeal to all aspects of the population. But the reality of the situation is that our officers, not that I'm one of them, are significantly lower paid than all the other local law enforcement. Local law enforcement agencies with respect to Metro, Washoe, pay their portion of PERS. And in our officers' case, out of their salary comes up to 44% to cover their share of PERS. So an officer coming on is making very, very little. And it's very hard for them to meet the needs of their families and their financial obligations right now. And I'm hopeful that soon we can look at the situation and hopefully repair it, but it doesn't appeal to any of the population, regardless of the diversity. Thank you.
Follow up, Chair, please.
Please go ahead.
Thank you. Just want to follow up on that. Thank you so much for that information and being able to send over that study so that we can dive into it a bit more. I'm sure some questions will pop up later on. But for me, the last one, would you say the biggest challenge is the pay to recruiting officers? Okay.
Absolutely.
Thank you.
Thank you.
All right, I'm going to go next to Assemblywoman Kasama, and after that, we'll go to after that, we'll go to Vice Chair Wynn. So please go ahead, Assemblywoman Kasama.
Chief Lawson, thank you so much for your overview. I had a question. You're restructuring the officers and the sergeant, and there was a comment that over supervision leads to recidivism. And I'm just curious, because I'm sure this has been well thought out for a long time, are these models based on other states you've seen that have implemented it, and then after it was implemented, they could compare to prior history that this does work, or what was the seed for how all of this started?
Tom Lawson, for the record, I'm sorry, your audio is cutting in now. I believe I have the gist of it, but if I've missed the topic, please let me know. If I understood your question correctly, it was regarding the low-risk supervision module and the foundation behind our thought process of looking at this new technique.
Correct, the new structure.
Okay. Yes, in the past, we've looked closely at other agencies. The state of Georgia is very progressive in their methodology of supervision. We've explored theirs. In fact, that's one of the places that we examined the daily reporting centers was in Georgia and the success there. Overall, it's the best practices is overall. There's a number of different entities that look at these things and track recidivism. And yes, we do try to model and emulate some of the other successful entities out there. Like I said, we examined Georgia's techniques quite a bit. But also it was also internal factors that were driving it. Yes, we know about the studies that talk about recidivism and over supervision can induce recidivism, but it was also an efficiency model of if we're going to carry X number of officer positions that we're unable to fill, well, that's increasing the caseload of all of our other officers because we're given X number of officers depending on our caseload ratio. When we have 17, 20% vacancy in the officers, that workload has to be carried by somebody else. And so we either scale back supervision overall, or we look at another more efficient way of doing that. And in this case, recognizing that we have a little better retention ability in terms of the specialist supervisors, the specialist, the probation specialists, using them for the administrative supervision functions, reduce the demand on the officers, allowed us to use less officers for that same supervision pod, and kind of just shifting our allocation of positions to more efficiently use it. So it was a combination of all those things. How do we address the vacancy rate and alleviate the strain placed on the existing officers? Because honestly, beyond the pay, when you're overworked, you also look for a different job. And so when some of our officers are having, an extra 30% or an extra 50% of their caseload because of vacancies, then they look for other solutions as well. In fact, we had an officer just within the last 6 months resign because of their caseload, and they went to work for an agency that actually paid less than us. So overwork is also a viable retention consideration. And I hope that addresses your question, Senator.
Yes, thank you.
And I had a mention in the chat that Director Tagliati would like to add something as well. So Director, please go ahead.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. George Tagliati for the record. I just wanted to revisit the recruitment and retention piece. And I've got to support everything that my deputy Sherry has mentioned. She got into some of the detail, but one thing that was really apparent to me when I entered the state system is the difference between what we have in the state of Nevada and the federal system. In the federal system, you can be in the FBI or you can be a U.S. Marshal Service, and it has its own retirement. Each have their own retirement system. Here in the state, we all have PERS, and I was just looking at an increase in their participation fees, but our PERS is also the Metropolitan Police Department's PERS, Washington County Sheriff's PERS. Everybody's on the same retirement system. So at any given day, someone in the Highway Patrol or Parole and Probation or any one of our sworn people can come up and say, I have decided I'm going to leave and go somewhere else. So as far as retention, it can happen during an entire career. Someone it wouldn't hurt them financially just to jump from, one agency to other. So now we have a situation where as recently as the end of last month, we were advised that PERS is going to take a larger share of the deduction from their paycheck, which now some of our employees may say, hey, wait a minute, I will go to an agency that does the matching PERS and I don't have to, and I can save this amount of deduction. So I just wanted to bring that. It's kind of the nature of the beast, if you will, with the retirement system as it's in place. So that hurts us as much as the disparate pay between, say, Metro, North Las Vegas, Washington County, and our Highway Patrol and probation officers. So they do make less. The Capitol Police, for example, where we made an effort to get them from DPS 1 to DPS 2 because we really have to have difficulty recruiting. And a lot of those folks are retired officers from other departments. But it's extremely difficult because they're the lowest, probably pay-wise, on the chain. And so the competition is heavy. You're looking at minority recruiting for women, and all of a sudden, as Tom mentioned, you look at the next booth and who's there. You've got the Metro and some of these other agencies, and they'll flat say, hey, you'll make more with us than you will there. So there's also cherry picking, if you will. The folks that we have, that the best of the best, that I believe, because we have some outstanding employees. And when they start interacting with other agencies, these other agencies are aware. John, Mary, whomever, they are really keepers. We are trying to recruit them to our department. And that happens every day when they're interacting with other agencies. God bless the other agencies, but they see talent, they know talent. They have the same requirements we do. They have the same objectives to try to bring in the best of the best, whether it's minorities, women, or anyone, and they're beating us up pretty good. So it is probably our biggest priority is recruitment and retention. Then add to that, as I alluded to this one-year program I'm involved with now with the FBI and other state agencies around the country, with this Executive Leadership Institute. Part of the brainstorming there is going to be recruitment and retention, as well as criminal justice reform, and also the change in focus, change in attitude, if you will, around the country regarding how people look at law enforcement, how people look at cops, and how many young people are coming up now and not wanting to get involved in criminal justice programs, maybe taking different majors in college, but certainly don't want to put themselves in harm's way based on the environment we have in this country right now. So it's not just us as DPS, it's not us as the state of Nevada. This is obviously a problem nationwide. And I think it's important we become on the cutting edge of that, and we stay involved and we find out other ways to solve this problem. And the more we can educate ourselves as to possibly what other agencies are doing and so on and so forth will certainly help. But at the end of the day, we got to truly understand this is a retirement system that we have in place that can be a burden to us as far as recruitment and retention. And also the fact that our pay there's an inequity between pay from our agency and others. Thank you.
Thank you for those comments, Director. Certainly appreciate the challenges your agency's facing have only been augmented by the current financial situation of the state. But, can't make any promises this session, but hopefully as we move forward and the state recovers, we can address some of those, at least try to. I have a few more members with questions. I'm going to go next to Vice Chair Wynn, and then after that, we'll go to Assemblyman O'Neill.
Thank you. I guess this is more of a comment and less of a question. I just wanted to say that I know that our state employees are just expected to do so much more with so much less. And having worked with various law enforcement agencies in my professional life, but also in this legislative role, I do want to say that I appreciate the innovation and creativity and willingness to look at evidence-based practices in the direction that the division is headed. I know that you guys have always been flexible, recognize when something isn't working, and try to come up with a new solution. And I think that's the best that we can ask for, especially in the current economic situation. I was fortunate enough to work with Chief Ann Carpenter, and so I know her leadership can be seen in the direction of the agency that she's been in charge of. And so I look forward to some of the new proposed structures that you're looking at, and as well as hearing some of the proposed legislation that you have this session. So just want to throw that out there.
Thank you, Vice Chair Wynn. Obviously, I could not agree more with you and your comments. I think we're all certainly appreciative of the challenges that all of you are facing and the hard work that you do on a day-to-day basis. Assemblyman O'Neill, you want to go ahead and ask your question, please?
Try to unmute. Yeah, this is directed to Chief Lawson. I want to first congratulate him and thank him for volunteering to take on the helm of a division that truly has a very difficult mission and challenging mission. But specifically on your indigent housing program, it sounds like a great program. Have you partnered with any of the veterans organizations or social service organizations to assist on housing and job find and creations with them to improve your success rate even?
This is Tom Lawson for the record. Thank you, Assemblyman O'Neill, for the question, and thank you for your kind words. And yes, absolutely. We have our sergeant who oversees that program. Part of their responsibilities is the development of vendors, participating vendors for those programs. And so we've also partnered with NDOC and working both sides of obtaining identification and really setting the foundation for applications for the inmates as they transition out into the community. Some of these vendors programs won't take people unless they go through a vetting process ahead of time. Some of that requires birth certificates. And so the caseworkers at NDOC work with our embedded specialists, and both of our staffs work really well in this regard in terms of trying to get those foundational documents in place. I know that's been discussed in last session. Quite a bit of the efforts NDOC has made to obtain those documents to better position the inmates as they transition out into the community. But we do a pre-vetting process. And so if we know that a releasing inmate is a veteran, then we start to explore the program opportunities and the housing opportunities before they are, or I guess in the initial phases of their release planning. And so sometimes the bed dates for some of those programs are quite a bit out, though, especially now that COVID has hit. a lot of those vendors that we were partnering with are reluctant to accept new entrants. And so that has, or limited their capacity of their program. And so that has stretched out when beds become available for those releasing inmates, which has an impact on the flow of some of those inmates out of the prison. If they're designed to go into a specific program because of their VA funding or because of their support, and they can't get a bed date for a few months, then we either have to look at a different avenue, which may not be as attractive for their release and their long-term success, or they have to stay in until that bed becomes available. But yes, we're actively looking for all avenues. We have a number of partnerships with programs and have explored innovative solutions to that to see if it was possible. We talked to purchasing about the possibility of establishing long-term solutions with some vendors where we would kind of control the flow of the person in and out of the program without having like a new registration every single time the bed were to turn over to a new inmate. Just things like that to be more efficient with the limited pool of resources we've been given, and as well as keeping the flow of inmates into those programs. An empty bed doesn't do anybody any good. So our goal is to keep them as full as we possibly can, given our means, and to have a queue of appropriate candidates ready for admission into those programs. One, to speed up the releases from custody, but also to make get the best bang for the limited dollars we have in that program.
Thank you, Chief. Thank you, Director. Chair.
I'll take a promotion. I could be a director. Thank you, Assemblyman O'Neill, and thank you, Chief Lawson. Do I have other questions? I have one I'm going to ask, but I want to give other members. So show me a hand or let me know in some way if you have a question. I'm scrolling through. I don't seem to see any other questions. Let me just take one more chance to look. Okay, great. So Chief Lawson, the only one I have, I guess by way of background, I'll just mention to the committee that some years ago, before any of us were here in the legislature basically enacted the Adam Walsh Act in the state, which required certain sex offenders to have to essentially be on lifetime supervision. And that was a new addition to the statute. And I don't know when that was. I want to say it was, you probably know, Chief Lawson, but 15, 20 years ago. And there was a concern over the years that the number of people who would be on lifetime supervision would just continue to sort of exponentially increase, and that it would be a major burden on the Division of Parole and Probation because they'd have to supervise these folks in addition to the regular parole and probationers. So, my question, Chief Lawson, is, has that come to pass? Is the agency able to supervise those effectively who are on lifetime supervision, or is there any concern that, down the road that caseload might become too much of a burden to handle without, additional funding and staffing?
Thank you for your question, Chairman Yeager. Lifetime supervision is really a misnomer. It's a term of lifetime supervision really doesn't give the division a lot of authority to truly supervise. We're very limited on the things that we can monitor a lifetime offender for. Even with the passage of SB 8 last session, it doesn't really give us a whole heck of a lot of power to exercise control over them. The Adam Walsh Act was delayed in implementation due to a number of lawsuits. And so I believe that didn't finally go active until November of 2018, I believe, off the top of my head. I maybe misspoke there, but it was not until very recently that Adam Walsh Act realistically became in play, and that changed the tiering level of a lot of sex offenders, and Chief McKay would know better than I on the impact to the tiering and things like that. But like I said, there's also a number of conditions there in statute now that if a lifetime sex offender is current on their registrations for 10 years and they don't commit a new crime within certain parameters, then we are required to release them from or request their release from lifetime supervision. And so, a number of offenders, they'll do their time, they will meet the requirements, and they will apply to be released. And it is a mandatory release. There is no discretion given in the statute of whether this person should be released or not. If they meet the criteria, they must be released. And so that, I think, balances out the numbers. But other than that, our population, as shown by the graph, is we combine it with the conditional release offenders, and really the conditional release is less than 200 statewide, and those are active inmates from NDOC facilities that have are granted release by the director of NDOC for meeting certain parameters. And we'll only have 1,179 total. So take away about 200 of those, and we're looking at roughly 900-ish lifetime sex offenders.
Great. Thank you, Chief Lawson. It's encouraging to hear that. Given where we are time-wise, I think we probably ought to move on. But Chief Lawson, I want to thank you for being here to present and answer all of our questions. I know we're going to see you very soon in the context of the bill hearing for AB 17. We'll reach out to you to try to get that scheduled at a time that works for you. Director Tagliati, I want to thank you for being here and having so many of your staff with us here this morning. And thank you for your willingness to work with us and for all that you and your staff do to keep us safe.
Thank you.
Thank you.
So have a great rest of the day. And committee, we're going to now move on to our final presentation. And I'm going to welcome to the committee Chairman Christopher DeRico from the State Board of Parole Commissioners. Thank you, Chairman, for being so patient and for sitting through the rest of this hearing. I have, committee, just so you know, I've had the pleasure to work with Chairman DeRico quite a bit over the last 2 or 3 years in terms of criminal justice reform, and he, like Director Tagliati and his staff, has just been wonderful to work with, incredibly responsive and helpful to some of the efforts that we've been doing here in the legislature. So welcome back to the Assembly Judiciary Committee, Chairman DeRico, and please proceed when you're ready.
Thank you, Chair Yeager. I'm going to pull up my presentation. And is my presentation available to everyone?
Yes, we see it on the screen. I think we're ready to go. And for anyone who might just be listening in, you can view it on Nellis as well at your leisure.
Great. Thank you. Good morning, Chair Yeager, Vice Chair Wynn, and all members of the Assembly Judiciary Committee. My name is Chris DeRico, and I'm the Chairman of the Board of Parole Commissioners. Also available today from the board is Kathy Baker, who is employed as our Management Analyst 3. Thank you for the opportunity to provide you an overview of the Board of Parole Commissioners. Before I begin my presentation today, I want to express my sincere condolences for the loss of one of your own at the legislature. I was saddened to learn yesterday about the passing of your Sergeant at Arms, Robin Bates. Not only was Robin an integral part of your legislative family, but he was also a part of my family here at the Parole Board. You see, Robin was employed for approximately the last 12 years as a contracted hearing representative for the Parole Board and filled in for parole hearings when necessary and aided the board in many other ways. He was employed here until his recent passing and took great pride in being able to take a 6-month break from the Parole Board duties every other year to come work alongside all of you. This is a very large loss to all of you, but it's also a very large loss to all of us at the Parole Board. Robin was my friend. I'll miss time spending time alongside him, both inside and outside of the office. For those of you that knew Robin, I grieve alongside you. And for those of you new here, I'm sorry that you did not get the opportunity to work with him. You would have considered him a friend as well. He epitomized Nevada, he loved the state, and he was always willing and ready to serve. God bless you and your family, my friend. I would now like to move forward with our presentation. As you will see on slide 2, the Board of Parole Commissioners is made up of 6 members and 1 chairman. We're all appointed by the governor, and I am the current chairman and have been in this position since July 2018. Prior to being appointed chairman, I was a commissioner, starting those duties in August 2017. In Las Vegas, we have Commissioners Christensen, Virgio, and Bailey. In the north, we have Commissioners Jackson, Baker, and a vacant position that we hope will be filled very soon, along with myself. So what is parole? Parole is a conditional release from prison. The court determines the initial parole release. However, the minimum sentence can be reduced by credits in the state of Nevada. This is typically what we refer to as AB 510 credits. Parole is an act of grace. There is no right to parole, and the state legislature has determined that. The parole board is responsible for making decisions to either grant or deny parole. However, that does not mean that we approve or deny parole release plans. We make parole decisions, and favorable decisions are passed on to the Division of Parole and Probation. They investigate and determine whether a release plan is appropriate or if a subsequent plan needs to be developed. We also return offenders to prison through the parole violation hearing process. Of note, we are an independent body. If you look at this chart of the Department of Public Safety management team, you will see that we are organized under them. Off to the side in yellow, you will see boxes that say Administrative Support and Parole Board, but it is not connected to the Department of Safety hierarchy. What this tells you is that we are an independent body and we are established under the governor in terms of who sits on the board. Commissioners serve 4-year terms. We are a very small agency with only 27 full-time employees located at 2 offices throughout the state, one in Las Vegas and one in Carson City. We are dependent upon the Department of Public Safety and their fine work of providing administrative services to us. Since being appointed chairman, I must admit that the Department of Public Safety staff has been providing outstanding service for us. This is the Nevada Board of Parole Commissioners organization chart. You will see the chairman oversees the operations of the entire office. However, the chairman does not oversee the commissioners. We all work for the governor. Interestingly, there's no executive director type of position directly under the chairman who manages the day-to-day operations of the office. Most other states do have this type of position. Because of this, these duties fall upon the chairman. In the future, this would be an ideal position to have. In addition to conducting hearings, covering for other commissioners, and being involved in personnel, hiring, budget, statistics, etc., the chairman has many other tasks to complete without a position directly below to assist. The chairman also directly supervises 4 individuals who are termed managers, who all have several individuals below them. Off to the right side, you'll also notice that the parole board assists the pardons board. Our staff reviews applications for community cases, and if they meet the criteria, the information is forwarded to the Division of Parole and Probation for investigation. In addition, our office reviews inmate applications. A pardons board member may also sponsor an inmate case, and if so, the information is provided to the Division of Parole and Probation for investigation and placement on an agenda. Regarding parole supervision, once we decide to grant parole to an inmate, they are supervised by the Division of Parole and Probation. If an inmate is granted parole, the Division of Parole and Probation provides that supervision. They do this by monitoring the parolee's residence, job, activities, associates, along with other duties. The parole board does not have parole officers under it, and these supervision services are provided by the Division of Parole and Probation. We are 2 separate agencies. Conditions of parole may include drug testing and treatment, residential confinement, no contact with victims, or requirements to pay restitution, just to name a few. The Division of Parole and Probation enforces the conditions as ordered by the board. The parole board is part of the judicial system. Statutes give us our marching orders and tell us how and what we are supposed to do. The parole board offers the system some flexibility. It's not black and white. For example, an individual may be sentenced to a term of imprisonment for a term of 2 to 20 years. This does not mean that the inmate is going to serve 20 years in custody, and at the end of the 20 years, he or she will be released. Rather, it means that the parole board may consider an inmate for parole at their minimum eligibility custodial term and decide if, for example, 2 years is enough time to serve in custody. The parole board may grant parole at any time between that hypothetical 2 to 20-year term. In making these decisions, the parole board needs to consider whether or not a particular inmate can be released and safely supervised prior to the expiration of their sentence. There are multiple types of parole hearings, and I will try and explain them to you now. A discretionary parole hearing is exactly that. It is at the discretion of the board. When an inmate is eligible for parole, the board will conduct a hearing to determine if this is the appropriate time to release a particular inmate out onto parole supervision. The decision is up to the board. It takes 4 commissioners to make a decision, either negative or positive. It is never one person deciding anyone's fate. Mandatory parole hearings are generally held if an inmate was not granted parole at a discretionary hearing. It is the last chance to get out of prison a little early with supervision. Mandatory parole is set by statute, and the primary consideration the board must consider when deciding whether or not to grant or deny at a mandatory hearing is whether the inmate is considered a danger to public safety. While there are many considerations for a discretionary hearing, the primary concern for mandatory parole hearing, as set by statute, is public safety. Recently, as a result of AB 236, which passed in the 2019 legislative session and effective July 1, 2020, the board can now grant mandatory parole in absentia on certain cases as long as the inmate has served 3 or more years on their effective sentence, they do not have a consecutive sentence, have not previously been granted parole on the effective sentence, and they are eligible. To do this, the board reviews files and determines whether or not to grant mandatory parole in absentia. Some considerations for this type of in absentia mandatory parole grant may be whether or not there are any victim notification requirements, the severity of the crime, and risk level of the inmate. If it's determined that the board may not grant mandatory parole in absentia, an in-person hearing will be scheduled. As part of AB 236, the board may now conduct geriatric parole hearings for certain qualified inmates. In order to qualify, an inmate cannot have been convicted of certain crimes, for example, crimes of violence, crimes against a child, sexual offenses, or vehicular homicide, nor do they qualify if they are found to be a habitual criminal. If an inmate is serving a sentence of life in prison without the possibility of parole or sentenced to death, they also do not qualify. Essentially, these inmates will not pose a significant and articulable risk to public safety. Lastly, they must be at least 65 years of age and served a majority of the maximum term of the sentence. These hearings are conducted in the same general manner in which other inmates are considered for parole. The board also conducts reconsideration hearings. An example of this may occur when an inmate who was granted parole but not yet released is found guilty of a major violation of prison rules. In these types of cases, and the Department of Corrections generally provides the board with notification of the rule violation. These violations may be for very serious things such as assault and battery, or some other type of serious offense, or it could possibly be for something not quite as serious. In a reconsideration hearing, the inmate will be scheduled to see the board again, and the board will review the details of the violation and deliberate on whether or not the violation is serious enough to change the previous position to grant parole. The board also conducts parole violation hearings, which result in either a return to incarceration or a release back to the community to satisfy the original requirements of parole. As a part of AB 236, if an individual is found guilty at a parole violation hearing of committing only technical violations of supervision and not for committing certain misdemeanor, gross demeanor, and felony offenses, or from absconding from their supervision, the board may temporarily revoke an individual for a shorter period of time, 30, 90, or 180 days, and then have them reinstated. I will provide additional information on temporary revocations later in this presentation. Also, as a part of AB 236, the board may conduct early discharge hearings. A parolee may meet certain requirements in order to qualify, such as having served at least 12 months on parole and have less than 12 months of parole remaining, no violation of supervision conditions within the preceding 12 months, current with supervision fees, paid restitution in full, unless the Division of Parole and Probation determines an economic hardship, and completed any substance abuse or mental health treatment program. The Division of Parole and Probation starts this process and recommends it when it is appropriate. The board also conducts lifetime supervision hearings. Lifetime supervision is imposed upon convicted sex offenders who have met the statutory requirements of their sentences, either through probation, parole, or completion of a custodial term. These offenders have an additional term of supervision of at least 10 years to life, and they are supervised by the Division of Parole and Probation. The board, by statute, is required to set those conditions. If someone violates the terms of lifetime supervision, the board is not involved. This is considered a new offense, and this matter is dealt with through the court system. This slide reflects our actual numbers for fiscal year 2020. Looking at NRS 213.1313, which was written many years ago, it states that meetings to consider parole may be held semi-annually or more often. I can tell you that the parole board generally has hearings scheduled every day of our work week. In fiscal year 2020, the parole board made 6,813 final decisions. Each of these decisions require a minimum of 4 votes in order to ratify, which equates to approximately 27,252 decisions entered by commissioners in the last fiscal year. If you include the hearings that did not result in final parole decision, we held approximately 8,723 hearings during fiscal year 20. As previously stated, we conduct hearings to include violation hearings every day of our work week in both Las Vegas and Carson City. We have 4 hearing rooms, and when necessary, we use all 4 hearing rooms at the same time. If you look at the caseload for fiscal year 2016 through projected fiscal year 2023, it details the general caseload over the past few years, along with the projections for the remainder of this fiscal year and the projections for fiscal years 2022 and 2023. The projections were taken from the Jim F. Austin Institute, JFA, Fall 2020 forecast. The figures for fiscal year 2021 are based on 6 months of actual hearings, 3,982, to include discretionary, mandatory, and violation hearings. These hearings also reflect any hearings that resulted in no action. Additionally, JFA has projected that our second half of fiscal year 2021 will result in 3,871 hearings. These hearings include all parole-related matters. The violation hearing projections are based on JFA's assumption that there will be 11.4 decrease in parole violators. These assumptions are based on the JFA draft 10-year prison population projections encompassing the years of 2020 to 2030. The most recent draft was used since it addresses the new legislation in AB 236 passed in the 2019 legislative session. We also compare cases by offenses. This chart shows you 5.5 fiscal years of parole consideration hearings by general offense type. This chart represents parole actions by offense group as defined by the Department of Corrections. Offenses appearing in sex category also include offenses such as prostitution with HIV, pandering, and failure to register as a sex offender. Of note, offenses that involve violence during the commission of an offense, but where the actual conviction was for an offense that would not, by itself, appear to be violent, will not appear in the violence offense group. For example, a burglary conviction that included striking a resident would appear in the property offense group. Offenses appearing in the other offense group include offenses that cannot be readily categorized into one of the other groups. For example, habitual criminals, gaming-related offenses, or victim over the age of 65 enhancements. Remember, these all could have been for a violent-related offense. We've included the actual numbers for the first half of fiscal year 2021 on this chart as well. What we are seeing now in the first half of fiscal year 2021 is an increased caseload over the past year. You can see that if we continue with this trend, we'll have approximately 6,238 parole hearings in fiscal year 2021. Remember, the above numbers do not include violation hearings, continuances, or hearings resulting in no action. This chart breaks down the percentages of inmates who were granted parole based on offense types. Just so you know, the total number of hearings conducted in fiscal year 2021 decreased due to COVID-19. However, I want to point out that there was a significant increase in the granted parole percentages for fiscal year 2020. The total grant rate for fiscal year 2021 was 71%, which is considerably higher than in past fiscal years. The reason for the significant jump had to do with COVID-19. On March 15th of 2020, the governor closed state offices to the public. However, per statute, all of our parole hearings must be open to the public. This left the board to find a way to move forward during the early months of COVID-19, especially since the Department of Corrections had already closed their facilities to visitors prior to March 15, 2020. This left the public with nowhere to attend a hearing. Certainly, the board did not want to defer hearings out until whenever state offices were once again open to the public. If we would have done that, we would have created a backlog of inmate hearings down the road. In addition, had we done this, it would have denied certain inmates the opportunities to release to the community in a timely manner when they were eligible. What the board could do was grant parole to inmates without a meeting if they met certain requirements. I want to make sure this point is very clear. The board can grant parole without a hearing in certain cases, but we cannot deny parole without a hearing. Statute does not allow the board to deny without a hearing. As a result, the board went through the files for all inmates who were eligible for parole in the second half of March, all of April, and all of May 2020. We were able to grant parole in absentia to those inmates that would have likely been granted at an actual hearing. For the cases where parole would have been denied or a hearing was necessary or additional information was needed, we requested no action, and those cases were rescheduled for a subsequent hearing, which began again as soon as June of 2020. As a result, this did increase our no action hearings in the fiscal year. However, by moving forward on the cases that met the requirements, our grant rate percentage for the month of March 2020 was 74%, which is significantly higher than our average months. Additionally, our grant rate percentage for the month of May and June 2020 were 100%, as we were only able to grant parole in absentia. We could not deny any paroles in absentia. We must have a hearing to do so. Since hearings were not held during this time period, it inflated our grant rate percentages for fiscal year 2021. Of note, our offices were closed from approximately mid-March through May 31st, 2020. Once the governor allowed state offices to open to the public again, with social distancing requirements in June of 2020, our grant rates returned to their normal average range. As a result of AB 236, the board now conducts violation hearings a bit differently. Depending on the nature of the violations, as previously stated, if an offender is found guilty of only technical violations, there's an incremental revocation period that must be imposed, followed by reinstatement. The technical violator must progress through the 30, 90, 180-day temporary revocation process before being able to be fully revoked or within statutory limits. Remember, temporary revocations do not apply if an offender has been found guilty of certain new crimes or if they absconded from their supervision. This is for technical violations of supervision only. This chart details the amount of temporary violation revocations and reinstatements from July 1, 2020 through December 31, 2020. We believe that our actual violation hearings will likely increase over time, as we are already starting to see individuals being returned for their second technical violation hearing, which may soon move into their third or subsequent hearings in the future. Prior to AB 236, there would only be one violation hearing, and if revoked, the board would later conduct another discretionary parole hearing on the revoked inmate to determine their suitability for another opportunity of parole if they were not revoked to expiration. In closing, I want you to understand that we are a small agency. We're a full-time board, much like the Gaming Control Board. But even though we're small in size with only 27 budgeted full-time employees, our impact on the state of Nevada is large. Our primary role is to conduct hearings and make decisions to either grant inmate releases to the community under supervision when appropriate, or to deny those inmates that may pose a risk to public safety. Certainly, the cost of supervision is much less than of community supervision is much less than supervising individuals in an institutional setting, and our commissioners and support staff are very aware of this. Our staff works very hard to do what we can to serve the best interests of all citizens in the state of Nevada. If any of you would care to spend a morning or afternoon with us observing hearings, please feel free to contact me and I'll make sure to set that up. As previously stated, our hearings are open to the public. Lastly, our website address is on this slide. Additional information can be found here to include our quarterly reports. Thank you for allowing me to present today. And if any member of the committee has any questions, please let me know. Thank you.
Thank you, Chair DeRico. And if I could ask you to, if there you go, we stop sharing your screen so I can have a chance to see the other members. Chairman DeRico, I wanted to thank you first for your comments about Robin Bates at the beginning of your presentation. I did not know that he worked with you and the board, but that does not surprise me because that just is the kind of guy that he is and was. And so thank you for that. We are all grieving together and trying to get through this the best that we can, but I appreciate those words as I know other members do. Before I hand it over to other members for questions, I just wanted to ask you a question, Chairman DeRico. I know the answer, but we have a lot of new members who I think might not be familiar. You had mentioned, and I believe before you, Director Togliatti and Chief Lawson had mentioned JFA projections. Could you just give a really high-level view of what those are, what that means for our new members who might not be familiar with JFA and how they interface with the state?
Sure, bear with me. And actually what I'm going to do is I'm going to see if Kathy Baker is available. I think she has more information on this. Kathy, are you available to assist with this question?
I am. Good afternoon, good morning. So JFA it reviews the current inmate population trends, and it analyzes computer extract files provided by the Department of Corrections. JFA takes into consideration the state's population growth, the crime rates, the crime comparisons between Nevada and the United States. But JFA projects release rates. So their projected release rates are based on prison release rates. And so they actually, the actual discretionary and mandatory release rates are based on parole grants, and release rates are different than parole grants. They tend to be slightly lower because when there isn't hard data on grant rates to project going forward, it's a safe number to use the JFA projections for the parole board. And I'm not sure if that answered all of your question. The release rates are different than grant rates because not all inmates who are granted release or granted parole are released. Some grants are 2 consecutive sentences. And so JFA counts that as a prison release rate other than a grant rate.
And I would add, Chair Yeager, and I'm not sure if you and the committee have a copy of this. If not, I can forward on to you the October 2020 version of the JFA report to you, so you could forward on to all members. It's a lengthy report. It's a 62-page report, but it will provide additional information and detail if you and the members need that.
Thank you to both of you for answering that. And just to step back even a bit further for committee members, if I'm not mistaken, I think JFA stands for James F. Austin, and so they're essentially like I'm going to call them a consulting or projecting firm. And so they look at the state's data and they project what the workload and caseload is going to be like for various state departments so that our agencies can project forward and look at budgets and staffing. So when you saw sort of the graph that Chair DeRico set up that goes through 2023 or beyond, those are projections. And so throughout the course of our hearings, you might hear people reference JFA, and I just wanted folks to know that that's what that means. It's essentially a service provider to the state. Ways and Means and Senate Finance get way more in the weeds on that stuff than we will in this committee, but I want to at least have members be familiar with the acronym and know what it means. So thank you for the clarifying information for that. I know so far I have a question from Assemblywoman Cohen, so we'll go to her first and then we'll open it up to others.
Thank you, Chair, and thank you, Chairman DeRico. I just have a quick question about those in absentia hearings. Is that something that's an automatic review, or is that something that has to, after there's an application?
Okay, so I'll say kind of neither. So what happens on the in absentia reviews typically, I'll talk pre-COVID, we can review. Well, let me step back. The Department of Corrections conducts an initial risk assessment, which is included in a part of their board report. And when we get that document, we review it, and then we have staff here that review what the recommendations or what that risk assessment and how it came out. Certain ones that came out in low levels, those are the cases that we would review and see if we could grant parole on those types of cases, the lower level cases without a hearing. In the last legislative session, we also, AB 236 expanded to allow us to review and grant in absentia on all mandatory parole hearings as well. So regardless of the status of their risk level or how they scored. So for instance, on our tool that we have in our risk assessment we get several different initial recommendations. The first initial recommendation might be parole this individual at their initial grant, or another one is parole at their first or second hearing. Another consideration, it might say consider factors, meaning consider the aggravating and mitigating factors of the case. And the last recommendation from this tool or risk assessment would say deny parole. That would be a high risk case that the evidence-based tool is telling us it may not be such a good case for release. As a part of AB 236, we can, with the mandatory case, we can now review all the way up to cases that say deny parole and determine whether or not we want to grant them without a hearing. Generally, that doesn't happen on those types of cases, but that was a type of a change. So we review primarily the cases that say parole at initial eligibility or parole at first or second hearing, and some of the consider factors. But for the mandatories, we can review all of the recommendations.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
We'll go next to Assemblywoman Gonzalez.
Thank you so much, Chair. I'm curious to know, how often do you update your risk assessment tools, and where do you get these risk assessment tools from?
Thank you for that question. So this is an excellent question, and this is something that I've been trying to push. I tried to push last session, and then I have the Sunset Subcommittee assisting me hopefully with it this year. But by statute, we have to. Our risk tool right now states that we have to. I believe it's every other year, Kathy. Or I'll have you. I'm trying to pull up the statute right now, Kathy. Will. And Kathy, if you're talking, you're on mute.
I'm turning on the unmute. Yes, it is. It's before January 1st of the odd numbered year. So it is every other year. We do a comprehensive review on the risk assessment to make sure that it meets all the requirements. The board holds a board meeting and makes a decision that it does meet all the requirements. And I apologize, I do not have the NRS in front of me. Chairman, do you have it?
I don't have it in front of me, however, but I can interject here. So It's not conducive. This is such a good question because it's not conducive how it's written in statute right now. And the reason that it's not conducive is really we need, and we've met with JFA, Jim F. Austin Associates, and spoken with them in order to really gather the data and have what we need. There needs to be a 3-year period of time for which the most recent assessment is in place. So I believe our assessment that we have now, it was reassessed last formally by JFA, I believe in 2018. And the board then determined that it was that the assessment at that time and the changes that were requested to be incorporated were good. And then we had to get them and actually place them, we had to put it into implementation. It wasn't able to be implemented until 2019 because of there was some delay time in getting the instrument into the Nevada Department of Corrections system, which they call Notice. And the parole board all works through this system. And so it went into effect, I believe, March of 19. Our most recent validated assessment started March of 19. So now we really need 3 years of time. So through March 20, March 21 to March 22 to gather that 3 years of time of data. At that point in time, it would be best to then have JFA review that data, do that assessment, go through it and determine what's working, what is not working, and propose additional changes. Okay, so that may take them 6 months, a year's time as well. Then the board would need to have a meeting and review it and determine whether or not it was something we would want to review and approve. And if so, then we need time for, and we found the last time was 9 months to a year for the NDOC to actually get it implemented so we could actually use that tool. So really every other year we validate and we have board meetings and validate that the tool that we have in effect is a valid tool. But in a perfect world, we need 3 years of data, some time to do the reassessment, some more time to implement, and then we can start running again. And that would be a perfect world.
Thank you so much, Chair. I just have a follow-up question. Do you use separate assessment tools for men and women populations?
Thank you for the question, Chair Dorico, for the record. We do not use separate assessment tools. We have a parole board risk assessment. The NDOC, PNP, and they use the NRAS, but we do not. Now, that doesn't mean that couldn't change down the road at the point of the next assessment, but I can tell you it is not a separate tool for males or females. However, as a part of the assessment, females are scored 1 point less than being male.
Thank you so much.
You're welcome.
Chair Dorico, does that 1 point less, I presumably means that they are less of a risk to reoffend?
Thank you, Chair Yeager, and that is correct. In fact, they are scored on that assessment. They are given a -1 point on the assessment, and males are giving a 0. So, and you're exactly right with that.
Thank you. Any other members have questions for Chairman Dorico? Let me scroll through here and see if I can get everyone on the same screen. Okay, I don't see other questions. I have I think what will be a quick one, Chair Dorico, and I appreciate your offer to allow us to come and watch a parole hearing. I just wanted to ask if we wanted to do that, where do you conduct the parole hearings? Where's the physical location that those happen?
Thank you, Chair Yeager. You're going to challenge me on knowing the address of my own offices right now. That's I really appreciate that. So, however.
No, that's okay. We would coordinate with you. I just wanted to confirm it somewhere here in Carson City.
Yeah, so we have an office in Carson City, and I do have the addresses, and 1677 Old Hot Springs Road, Suite A in Carson City, and also at 4000 Southeastern Avenue, Suite 130 in Las Vegas. And once again, we do conduct hearings generally. We work Monday through Thursday, 410s. Those 10-hour days for us are because our hearing periods go late a lot of times. 8-hour days really are not conducive to the amount of hearings that we do. We conduct generally about 50 hearings between offices statewide, sometimes more. But we have hearings scheduled all the time. So if anybody wants to, please feel free to reach out to me, and I can give you some information on when might be a good day to come by.
Thank you, Chair Dorico. And is there any option to participate or watch virtually at this point, or is everything in person?
Thank you for the question, Chair Yeager, Chris Dorico, for the record. So right now, the answer to that is no. We have, we could set up something by telephone, but no, we requested some grant funds and were recently approved, and we're trying to move to the Zoom world, like here, as well as you. Unfortunately, we're a small agency. We don't have an IT person. We don't have certain other things that we need in here. We rely upon others, and getting ultimately to that Zoom world, which I want to get to. My Las Vegas office isn't even on the state phone system. I'm trying to get that taken care of, but one of the biggest concerns for me to getting there is the safety and anonymity of victims through Zoom. So I want to get there and to move there and trying to progress through there, but certainly that is such a big thing for me I need some assistance and technical support in order to set this up, because I don't want to jeopardize any victims once we go to this type of format.
Yep, thank you. Certainly makes sense. Well, members, please, if you are interested, reach out. If you'd like to see a parole hearing in action, sounds like we're going to have a lot of opportunities to do that. We're pretty busy here, but occasionally we get a little bit of unsupervised release out of the building. So hopefully we can make that happen. So last call for questions while we have them here. Chair Dorico, any questions from the members? Or is everybody worn out on Zoom today, which I would not fault you for. It's a new world we're living in. So I don't see further questions. Chair Dorico, I want to thank you. Ms. Baker, thank you for weighing in on some of those questions as well. We appreciate you being here this morning, and I'm sure we are going to see you and talk to you plenty of times along this next 117 days of the legislative session.
Thank you for having us.
Take care. Okay, members, so that brings us to our final agenda item for today, which is public comment. So just as way of a reminder, we are always going to reserve up to 30 minutes of public comment at the end of each meeting. And the way that will work is we have folks participating by phone if they'd like to give public comment, and they will each have 2 minutes to provide that comment after they state their name, state and spell their name. So broadcast services, if you could let us know if there is anybody on the public comment line, and if so, if you could queue up the first caller, please.
Good morning. Thank you, Chair. At this time, the public line has been open and working. However, there are no callers at this time.
Okay, thank you so much. All right, before we conclude with some announcements, is there anything else from any members of the committee? Okay, I don't see anyone raising their hand. I will note we haven't heard yet from legal counsel, Mr. Wilkinson, but as you noticed, he is on these meetings with us, and I suspect when we get into bill hearings, we're going to have some questions for him. That tends to happen in bill hearings, but I just wanted to let you guys know that he is on with us, as is Ms. Thornton, our policy analyst, and Miss Ashley Kalina, who I introduced as well, is on the Zoom today as well. So, okay, members, thank you again for your attention today. I know it can be pretty difficult to hear these presentations on Zoom, but I appreciate your attention and your questions. In terms of the lay of the land for the Judiciary Committee, let me grab my schedule here and let you know what we're looking at for the rest of this week. So tomorrow, again, we're going to start at 8 a.m. because we have presentations from the Gaming Control Board and the Cannabis Control Board, and I suspect there may be a decent amount of questions, particularly on the Cannabis Control Board side. So that will be tomorrow, and then Good news for everyone, Friday, we will not be having a Judiciary Committee meeting. So you get Friday off to sleep in a little bit or catch up on some of that work that I know that we're all sitting on right now. And then looking forward to next week. At this point, we do have meetings scheduled at least so far Monday through Thursday. All of those are going to be at 8 o'clock, including Mondays. Sometimes we try to move Monday's meeting to 9 o'clock, but we have a lot to get through on Monday. We're going to be hearing presentations from law enforcement, as well as the 2nd Judicial District Court and the 8th Judicial District Court. So I suspect those are going to take some time. So, but in the future, we may try to move Mondays to 9 o'clock just to get us started off the week. And then, as I mentioned earlier, we don't have bills scheduled yet, but I'm hopeful we may be able to hear a bill or two next week. It will not be on Monday. Tuesday would be the earliest. And of course, we'll give you and the public notice of that when it's going to happen. If you're interested in diving into bills, I mean, I know everyone has a lot going on, but there are a number of pre-filed judiciary bills that you could start to review online. For those who may be traveling back to Southern Nevada, sometimes that's a decent thing to do on the airplane back. So I think that's all I have for today. Again, just want to thank everyone for participating and being here. And I will see all of you at 8 o'clock tomorrow morning. This meeting is adjourned.